let's go ahead and dive into today's demonstration and get into the fun stuff. So hopefully you can all see my screen now. We're going to start here within Slack, where we've been notified of an incident within our sales table. And of course, I'm using Slack for this example, but Monte Carlo has integrations with all the popular notification collaboration tools like your ServiceNow, your Microsoft Teams, Jira, and the like. So I'm just using this for example purposes, but of course you could slot in whatever tool set you're leveraging in place in this example. Now, what we're seeing here is that there's 5 different metric anomalies that are impacting this sales table. So we can see a couple of different fields that are being impacted are things like our discounts field and our current price. And we can also see that Monte Carlo is already surfacing that it has some insights that it wants to call out to us that will help us resolve this incident. So what we can do from here, now that we've been notified of this incident, is we could go ahead and mark it as an incident, and we could set our severity and make updates to let our team know that we are working on this incident, we're on the ball, and we're going to be digging into this moving forward. This is just one of a number of different ways where Monte Carlo supports you in operationalizing incident management. And so we'll be talking through that as well over the course of this example. So let's actually dive into this incident and learn a little bit about how we can start by triaging and then work out resolving this incident. So we're going to click into this, and that will bring us into Monte Carlo, where we can see some more information about, this individual incident and why it was breached. So the first part of resolving this incident is going to be triaging it. So of course, when you break your arm and you show up to the emergency room, the first thing that the doctor is going to do is try to triage your injury, understand the pain and the criticality. We're going to do the exact same thing with this incident here. And leveraging that same metaphor, the first thing that we want to do is notify all your different emergency contacts that you've been injured. And we take the same approach here where we notify all the different relevant parties of, an incident impacting this sales table. And so you can set up very bespoke alert routing rules to ensure that all relevant stakeholders are notified of an incident within the sales table impacting a number of these different fields. The second part of triaging is we can look into our impact analysis. So understanding what users and what processes are going to be impacted by this incident. So for instance, we can see that there's 5 different data warehouse users that frequently query this table or downstream tables. And we could reach out to those folks individually to let them know that there's an incident impacting the sales table. Furthermore, we can also understand what different BI assets are further downstream of this sales table. So you can see things like your Tableaus, your Power BIs, your Sigmas. And this is usually the point in the demo where someone asks, well, Taylor, how did you determine that these different assets are further downstream? So just to preemptively get ahead of that question, ultimately what Monte Carlo is doing is we are integrating with a number of your different systems, including your data warehouse in this example, and your different BI tools like Tableau in this case. And we're leveraging query logs to build out this lineage automatically. So there's nothing that you need to configure to tell us that these different BI assets are downstream. We're able to build out those relationships automatically. So now that we have an understanding of who's been notified, what users will be impacted by this incident, and what different BI assets are leveraging this table, we now have enough information to understand that, this is a pretty critical incident. We've got 20 downstream reports and 5 different folks that are leveraging this table. So we should make it a top priority to go ahead and resolve. So moving onwards, we're going to talk through how we can actually go through resolving this incident now that we've triaged it. So let's actually first talk about what this incident is and what this monitor was and what type of behavior we're observing. So again, like I've mentioned a number of times, we've seen 5 different field anomalies, and I'm going to focus on one just for simplicity's sake here. So maybe this current price field. What we've done is we've told Monte Carlo to observe the behavior of this current price field and notify us of any behavior outside of the ordinary. So Monte Carlo has studied the behavior of this field over a number of different weeks and observed that what we expect in terms of normal for a price field is anywhere between $3,000 and $51,000. But what's triggering this monitor is that we're seeing now an average value of negative $577, which, gut check, definitely doesn't make sense for a price. So this monitor is ultimately leveraging machine learning to study the behavior of these different fields and notify you of anomalous behavior. And of course, the reason why this is important or why this can be helpful is it allows you to deploy these monitors in a more scalable fashion so that you're not having to investigate each of these different fields and define what a threshold should be. You're allowing historical behavior to define that. That way you can ensure that your monitors aren't too noisy or conversely aren't noisy enough to pick up on behavior outside of the ordinary. So with all that background of what this monitor, this incident that has been observed is, let's actually talk about resolving it. So a number of the different insights that are going to be surfaced to you, the first of which is going to be that Monte Carlo will automatically write a query for you that will run against your data warehouse. And so you can leverage that query either, one, in this case, to run it and visually profile the data to understand if there's shared characteristics of the data that's breaching this monitor. Of course, from running this, I can see we've got lots of different duplication here. It looks like, a single invoice ID, a single plan ID, so on and so forth. You could also use this query to take some action, like sequestering this broken data so that it doesn't impact downstream models. Now, furthermore, beyond visually profiling it, if there is a correlation between the profile of data that we're seeing this monitor breach related to or related query changes or failures, Monte Carlo will surface that information as well. So as we saw just from visually profiling it, this incident is really correlated to a single invoice ID ending in 260. So that gives us some context that it looks like there's something that's gone wrong with this individual invoice. We're seeing lots of duplication and just field quality incidents across this individual invoice ID. So I can now take that information and reach out to some of our business teams to understand what's going on with this individual invoice itself. So maybe take a pause and see if there's any questions at this point, now that we've kind of talked through how we can begin triaging and resolving incidents. Looks like there's no questions in the chat. Again, if you have questions throughout the way, feel free to throw them in the chat box and we'll make sure to address them along the way. All right. So now if we want to continue investigating this asset to understand what other events could have occurred, we can come up to the top and choose to investigate asset. And that is going to bring us to our asset page, which is essentially a one-stop shop for all information and events related to this sales table. So I can see, for instance, historical incidents that have impacted this table over the past 3 weeks to understand if maybe this incident that we're seeing here is a repeat offender. It's something we've seen in the past. I can also see a number of different monitors, including our pipeline-based monitors that look at freshness, volume, and schema, which we'll definitely dive into a little bit later on in today's discussion. You also see some information around query logs or orchestration jobs that are updating this individual table, for instance. So I can see a number of different queries that have run on this table over the past 3 weeks and DBT model runs, Airflow jobs, GitHub PRs, and Fivetran jobs. And ultimately, Monte Carlo surfaces all this information so that when an incident does occur, you have all the information about the sales table at your fingertips to quickly identify what caused it or what may be related to this incident. Looks like we do have a question. So does Monte Carlo support all 5 observations: pipeline, quality, infrastructure, data, usage, users, and FinOps? That's a great question. So a couple of the different observations that we're going to be going through over the course of today are going to be pipeline, quality. We'll also talk a little bit about FinOps here over the course of today's conversation. So again, I'll cover that as we go through today's demo. And then if you have any outstanding questions, definitely let me know. Awesome. So now that we've covered off on all the different event information that's surfaced related to the sales table, let's talk a little bit about lineage. Now, when we were looking at triaging that incident in the beginning, we were able to surface all the different downstream BI assets that are leveraging this sales table. Now we can see further broken out lineage related to the sales table within our assets page. So I could, of course, look further downstream to understand what types of BI assets or dependencies are downstream to understand what the impacts may be. Or conversely, I could look upstream and understand, in this case, that we are seeing a number of different reported incidents impacting our Salesforce account table that could have some unintended impacts on the sales table that we're looking at. Again, this is just providing more context to you when incidents are surfaced to understand if they're the result of something further upstream, and also understanding what the impacts could be downstream. Similarly, we also surface field lineage so that you can understand what the different relationships are between key fields, both one step upstream and one step downstream. So for instance, I can see looking at this invoice ID field, this is our key, and I can see a number of different tables and views that are leveraging that invoice ID field. And you can see both select and non-select relationships. Again, helping to surface this information to accelerate that root cause analysis. So flipping over to our monitor page, let's first talk about what the different types of monitors are. So there's 3 general monitor types that we offer here at Monte Carlo, the first of which being pipeline-based monitors. So our pipeline observability monitors are going to look at 3 different factors. They're going to look at freshness, volume, and schema. And so when we're talking about freshness, ultimately what we mean is that Monte Carlo is studying the historical behavior of that table and identifying how frequently or the timeliness of the updates that are made to that individual table. And so if a period of time elapses and there hasn't been an update when we would expect it to occur, you will be notified that there is a delay in that pipeline. Similarly, for volume, that's referring to the completeness of the update. So we'll study the historical behavior, the historical amount of data that you're typically receiving with each update, and notify you if you're either seeing a high volume of data or lower volumes of data within your updates. And then, of course, schema changes. If you have critical fields that are added or removed or renamed, we're going to notify you of those as well. These 3 different pipeline observability monitors are deployed automatically and are driven by machine learning. So there's nothing that needs to be done or configured for you to enable those automated monitors. So now that you're familiar with the pipeline-based monitors, let's dive into some of our other monitor types. So there's 2 general monitor types that I will focus on next, and that's really our validation and our metric monitors. These are going to allow you to enforce field level quality metrics. So we'll maybe dive into one just as an example. So let's create a field quality metric, and we'll look at that same sales table that we began with. Now I could set up this metric to look at, for instance, maybe the uniqueness of our different ID fields, because we're going to leverage those ID fields for downstream transformations. And if we start to see duplication, that's going to mess up all of our joins and different logic that we have built out. So I can add this metric monitor to all the different ID fields that we have within this sales table. And again, as we covered earlier on, I could, of course, set my own threshold. For instance, I could say these should always 100% of the time be unique. Or you could leverage machine learning thresholds, which in the example that we started with, we had deployed. And that will ultimately, again, just study the behavior of those ID fields and perhaps observe that 98% of the time they're unique. And then if you start to see a significant drop in that uniqueness metric, you will be notified. Again, with each of these different monitor types, you can dictate the schedule in which you want these to run, whether it's on a set cadence or event triggered based on when the table is updated. And you can set up bespoke alert routing rules based on each individual monitor of who should be notified. And then lastly, you can always create your own custom SQL-based monitors to enforce your own business rules. So the last piece that I do want to mention is going to be around how you can actually deploy these monitors. You're obviously seeing how you can create them in the UI, but you can, of course, always create and deploy these monitors programmatically via monitors as code. An example of that could be, for instance, if we updated that sales table and we added a new column and we wanted to carry over that uniqueness metric to those new fields that we added in there, we could deploy this monitor as part of our CI/CD process so we can ensure that our metric monitor is now incorporated with those new columns that we added. Similarly, Monte Carlo has robust API capabilities, so all the different metrics and information that you're seeing here within the UI can, of course, be pulled via API. But similarly, you can also trigger these monitors based on individual events. An example of that could be our circuit breaker functionality. So for instance, as part of your different pipelines, you can trigger a monitor to ensure that your data is enforcing specific constraints or rules or thresholds that you set for it. And if that data doesn't meet those requirements, you can then stop the flow of data to downstream systems so that you avoid any downstream impacts. There's just a little bit of an overview, of course, how you can create these monitors and a high-level overview of the different monitor types. Of course, as you're seeing here, we have a number of different monitors that we could go into. So at the end of today's session, you will also be prompted to set up a follow-up demo where we can actually talk through what types of data testing would apply best to you and how you can deploy those different monitors.